Hi friends, my name is Ajay Dwivedi. Today we are going to talk about uh, one infra that I call as Credential Manager. So if you have ever written PowerShell scripts, you might have faced a situation where you want to connect to a SQL server or some other server where you need to provide a password or credential there. As per industry best practices, you should not save the passwords locally on the disk or your files, okay, on your script files. So what are the alternatives? What is the alternative that I follow for all the automations that I write? I'm going to talk about that in this video session. So just for an example, suppose I want to connect to this SQL Server instance and I want to run this query on that instance. uh, as a user, I want to use a SQL query stress, and here there is a parameter called password where I have to provide password for this login that I'm going to use to connect to this SQL Server instance. The first option that I have here is I can hardcode the password. Okay, so suppose the password is XYZ, I can hardcode the password here in the script itself. Now, this is not recommended at all. Rather, it is one of the most common security violations, and your code may get flagged due to that reason. So, what is the other alternative that I follow? I'm going to share that here in this session. So, let's start. Now, before starting in deployment of Credential Manager, where you will get the code, to get the code of Credential Manager, all you need to do is you need to go to my this particular URL, ajaydivedi.com / github / SQL Monitor. It will take you to SQL Monitor GitHub repository. So within SQL Monitor GitHub repository, there is a folder, Credential Manager. And within this folder, you will find all the scripts which are required to work with Credential Manager. Starting at the bottom, starting from the bottom four scripts, they create some stored procedures like adding a credential to the Credential Manager, deleting a credential from Credential Manager, retrieving passwords for a user login from the Credential Manager, and finally, if you want to remove a credential from Credential Manager. Then the this script sch means schema change. Sch dvo.credential manager. This script contains tsql for creating the credential manager tables. Then we have this script sch permissions, which contains all the required permissions that should be granted on all the objects of credential manager. Finally, second from the top, query uses Credential Manager. So this script contains all the various ways in which I use Credential Manager for retrieving password and some samples it contains. So let's start. I have already downloaded this SQL Monitor GitHub repository itself on my inventory server. So I will be looking through these scripts from my inventory server itself. So here I am. That SQL Monitor GitHub repository is a SSMS solution. I have already loaded that SSMS solution, and here you can see within that SSMS solution, solution name is SQL Monitor. So within that SQL Monitor SSMS solution, I have this folder called Credential Manager, or it's a project, SSMS project. So here you can see now. So where do we start? The first thing that we have to do is we have to create the required tables for SQL Monitor. For that, you have to open this script sch dbo.credential manager. Select appropriate your database where all the objects for Credential Manager will be deployed. Remember that this database is the one which you will always have to connect to fetch the credentials from Credential Manager. So here we go. Now we are going to execute whatever all the T-SQLs in the context of this database. Starting from the First one, we are going to create a table called Credential Manager, which has history enabled in it. With then we create a table which will record the audit information. Audit information simply says who changed what for what credential. So that is also done. Pretty much only two tables are required in this infra. Now we will create all the procedures which are required in this infra. So all the procedures one by one: add credential, delete credential, get credential, and update credential. So let's start all of them one by one. Update credential done, get credential done, delete credential done, and finally we have add credential. So I have created all the required procedures and tables. The final piece that we have here is to assign appropriate permissions, because right now we have only created the table which will store the password. Okay, which will store all the usernames and their passwords in the table. But anybody who has read permission on the server, they would be able to read the data from that credential manager table. So we want to get rid of that thing. So all you have to do is open this SCH permissions script. The first thing which we do is we create some certificate under the context of master database. So we go here and create certificate. It is saying that password policy is not met here. So what I have to do is encryption by password. I have to change this thing here. This password is being used at multiple places, so it's better I do it on all the places in one go. You can choose whatever password you like. There is no restriction in this on this context, but in my case I'm going to do this way. So it will replace these contexts: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, seems good to me. So let's replace all in one go. Done. So I can start from here. So I think statement executed successfully. Only thing is the certificate that I am trying to create already exists on my machine, since I have tested it multiple times previously also. So yeah, you can ignore the error message. Same goes for this second statement where I am trying to back up the certificate. It is again saying that the certificate already exists. I mean certificate already exists on this path. Or here it is saying cannot write into the file, verify that. Okay, so probably this path is also wrong. Let me just make sure it is correct path. On my system, the path should be EMSSQL 15 blah blah blah. So I should make sure this is changed to E drive. So let me do that. Okay, so all 5 locations have been modified. Now I am good to start. So before I go there, let me remove all the existing files if they are there. E MySQL 14 log and these two. So there we go. I have removed those files. So I can issue this backup statement one more time and it completed successfully. Next thing is we have to create a login from the certificate that we just created on in the master database context. So in my case it may exist. That's due to that I may get an error. Here you can see the login itna could not be created because the login already associated with the certificate. So pretty much I don't need to do anything here also. The next thing is after creating the login, I want to make that login as a sysadmin on the box. So there I go. I made that login as a sysadmin on the box. Remember, since it is a certificate based login, uh, nobody can use this login manually if they want to connect to SQL Server. Since it's a certificate based login, they cannot do that manually. So it's pretty safe this way. Next thing is we want to ensure that nobody has select rights on the Credential Manager table. So we are going to deny any kind of select under the Credential Manager for Credential Manager table under context of DBA database. Post that we create a certificate in the context of DBA database using the backup which we just created a minute back. So there we go. It is saying that certificate already exists in the context of DBA database. So again, I don't need to do anything else here. Next thing is in the context of database, DBA database, now I have to create a user from the same certificate we just restored. So this also would throw error in my case because I already have this user IC, it seems. And then we have to make that user DB owner on the database. Now, up to this point, everything was done. What everything was done here is create a login on server using certificate, backup that certificate, using that backed up certificate, create a user in the DBA database and provide it DB owner there. Now, here what I am simply doing is I am binding that yeah, I'm binding SP who is active with that certificate, so you can ignore this part. Next thing is under the context of database, we want to grant connect to public and guest users. Why? Because this is a credential manager database. We want everyone to be able to access the credential manager as long as they are valid owner of credential. Okay. So you should not be denied access to the database, but you cannot retrieve any data if you are not authorized. Okay. So we provide connect to any public user or database user. Then this is the first part. What we are doing here is we are adding a signature to all the stored procedures that we have in Credential Manager, and then we are granting everybody execute permission on those stored procedures. So we added a signature to the stored procedure using the certificate, and then we are here we have granted execute on that procedure to everybody. Same thing we are carrying out on all the objects, all the other procedures also in Credential Manager infra. So that's it. So how many procedures we have? We have get credentials, add credentials, delete credentials, and finally update credentials. 4 stored procedures, 2 user tables. That's it. Now let's see at the usage of that. So if you want to get some samples of Credential Manager, here you can use this script. So change the database to DBA. Now, if you run select star on the Credential Manager table, so I have logged in using my own credential and I am sysadmin on the server. So you can see here, if I run as username, it is lab Adivedi, which is part of DBA's SQL admins. So it is a administrator on the box. So as an administrator on Credential Manager server, you can do anything. Okay. So we'll talk about that also, and how Credential Manager, if I want to hide a credential even from SQL admins, we will see a scenario of that case also. So let's start from here. If anybody, irrespective of who they are, if anybody runs select star from Credential Manager table, they will receive an error. Okay, they did not receive an error, it seems. Okay, so no error, I guess. Maybe I am confused with other tables. So I want to find out how it looks like right now. So right now, since we just created our credential manager infra, there is no credential or username saved in the table. So let's, for an example, let's start with the adding a new few credentials here. So I'll go in another query window and I will start adding some credentials here. Before we add some credentials, let's okay. So to add credentials, we have to use procedure USP add credential. Some parameters that this procedure has. If you want to know all the parameters, simply press Alt F1 from keyboard. So select the procedure name and press Alt F1. So these are the parameters which are available in this stored procedure. Okay. While adding a credential, you can mention that whether that credential belongs to one particular server or IP, or it belongs to all the servers. If it belongs to all the servers, in the server IP you can mention star there. If it belongs to a particular server, you can either mention the server IP or its name, but either of them is mandatory. At least one of them is mandatory. So star means for all, this credential, whatever I am saving, it is valid for all the servers. If you provide only one name there, it might be valid only for one server. That's it. Next thing you have to provide is the username and password string. Okay. So username is what is the credential username, and password string is what is the password for that. Okay. So in my case, let's start with this one. I have a Grafana user, Grafana login, and the password for that I tried to keep it simple. The password also is Grafana only. So here I'm going to add a login Grafana and save the password of that Grafana in the credential manager. Apart from that, there is a parameter called passphrase string. So what passphrase string is essentially is, uh, in credential manager, while saving the password, we save it in an encrypted format, so that even if somebody got the read access on the table, even if they look at the data, it would be encrypted data, so it is not meaningful at all. Okay. But how to decrypt that data, that would be decided by, to decrypt the data, credential manager need this passphrase. Okay. So as a credential owner, I can decide whether to save the passphrase or key, or in other terms you call it salt also. So passphrase or key or salt, if you want to save the passphrase in the database itself, in the credential manager itself, then you can decide that. If you don't want to save the passphrase, this is totally different from password. Okay. Passphrase is the key to decrypt the password. Password is always saved in the credential manager. Passphrase, will it be saved or not, would be decided by the person who owns that credential. So while adding the credential, if you pass this parameter at the rate passphrase, at the rate save passphrase equals to 1, if it is mentioned as 1, credential is saved, passphrase is saved in the credential manager. If you mention this as a 0, then passphrase or key, encryption key, is not saved in the credential manager. So not even sysadmins can decrypt it. We'll look at an example there. So let's start with very simple example. In order to keep everything simple, I am leaving this passphrase and save passphrase as a default. Okay. So when you don't provide these parameters, what essentially will happen is credential manager will automatically calculate a random passphrase, and it will save that passphrase in the credential manager database. Finally, in the remarks, you can mention something that will always help you identify why you what this user or login is supposed to mean to you. So in my case, I am simply putting a remark Grafana credentials. That's all. Then apart from these, there are few more parameters here. The first one is delegate login 1, delegate login 2. So I can also decide who else, apart from sysadmins, who else can retrieve the password for this login. So I can specify two people. So delegate 1 is the that first person, delegate login 2 is that second person. Okay. So if I delegate it to somebody else, they would be able to get the password for this login. Okay. So not to make it more complex, let's keep it to this much only, whatever you see on my screen. I'm providing server IP equals to star. That means this credential username password is valid for all the servers. Then I'm providing the username and I'm providing the password string that I want to save. Okay, so this is the password for this login. And in the remarks, I simply provided some text so that it always helps me identify what is this meant to be. So let's execute this, and there we are. It is giving me the result that credentials saved. So I can run that query. I can run this query, which tells me now in the Credential Manager database, I have one server. Okay. So I have one credential saved. That credential is valid for all the servers. Whether it is SQL login or RDP login, you can mention that also. I forgot to mention this, but I could have checked is SQL user to 1 because it was a SQL user. So for that, I had to do this thing. I had to use this parameter there. Is SQL user equals to 1. Then this is the password that we provided for Grafana login. As I mentioned earlier, the password is saved in encrypted format. So nobody would be able to know what this password means. But in order to decrypt this password, we will need a salt which is already saved in the same credential manager table. Okay. Then we have created date, created by, updated date, updated by, and then two people who can always, apart from the owner of the login or sysadmins on the server, these two people, that is delegate login 01, delegate login 02, they can retrieve the password for this user. Okay, so this is how pretty much it works like. Now let's put an entry for a second example. So I have another login on all the servers that is called SQL query stress. uh, just like the Grafana, I try to keep the logins very simple. So even for this SQL query stress login, the password is same, SQL query stress. Now in this one, I want to mention the specifically that it is a SQL login, and I can change the remarks here. Okay. One thing which I want to do here is I want to say that for this login, okay, for this login, I want to delegate Grafana login. Oh, okay, we can experiment that thing later. First, let's make it this simple. So I'm going to create this one now. So we have added till now, we have added two logins in Credential Manager. One is Grafana, one is SQL Query Stress. Okay, looks pretty straightforward. Let's add a third one. So let's add a login called SQL CMD, and to keep everything simple for that also, the password is SQL CMD. Okay, but for this parameter, I am going to make Grafana login as a delegate for this credential. So what essentially it means here is Grafana is authorized to retrieve the password for SQL CMD from Credential Manager. So that's it. So if now I recheck the data in Credential Manager, I can see that for SQL CMD login, Grafana login has been mentioned as a delegate. So ideally, the Grafana login should be able to retrieve the password for SQL CMD, but same Grafana login cannot retrieve the password for SQL query stress. Now, key point here to remember is sysadmins on the Credential Manager server, they can retrieve any login password as long as the salt is present on the server. Okay, so let's see that. So let's add another one. So we will call this one as, uh, let's say the login name is Ajay and password is Divedi. Now, for this login, I don't want anybody to retrieve the password. So what I will do here is I will specifically pass the passphrase or the encryption key or uh, uh, or what you call it is called as salt also. So I will specifically pass this thing here. Now I don't want to save this salt in the database so that nobody, even sysadmins, can retrieve this password apart from me. Remember, even if I want to decrypt the password later, since salt is not would not be saved in the credential manager, I will always have to pass the passphrase or salt or a decryption key. Okay, so here for the save passphrase equals to 0. Rather, let me keep my login to a standard way. So say Dwivedi surname looks good. And even though I declare this Grafana login as a delegate, even Grafana login would need salt to retrieve the password. So here we go. We can see all the 4 users which have been saved in Credential Manager. We can see their passwords in encrypted format. For 3 of them, salt is already saved in the database, but for one of them, salt is not present in the database. Okay, so even sysadmins cannot retrieve the password for this top one. So let's see if what I said is really works or not. So there is this query in the end. Okay, so there is this query in the end which will this one, sorry, which has a way to even decrypt the password as long which can be used by sysadmins to check the password also. So here you can see I just ran the query. Here we can see that for all the logins like Grafana, SQL CMD and SQL Query Stress, we were able to decrypt the password. But for the first, but for this A Dwivedi login, for which salt was not saved on the credential manager, decrypting the password is not possible until and unless salt is provided in the command line by the user. Okay. Now let's test other scenarios. So first thing which we tested is even sysadmins cannot encrypt the password, cannot decrypt or know the password of a user as long as I don't save the salt on the credential manager. So if you have a scenario where you want to hide something, hide a password from sysadmins, you can utilize this method. So let's test these scenarios out now. The permission scenarios, remember Grafana login has been made delegate. Okay, Grafana login has been made delegate for SQL CMD but not for SQL query stress. So ideally Grafana login should be able to retrieve password of SQL CMD but not SQL query stress. So let's connect to this server with Grafana login. Copy the username, put password, connect. Okay, so just to show you that I have now connected through Grafana login as username, and there we are. Now whatever we are running in this query window, it is under Grafana login. So to retrieve a credential through command line, because a normal user, you have to be sysadmin to run a select on credential manager. Okay, so we can validate that here. If I run a select here, I will get a access denied there. Remember, for everybody we have denied access or for select on the credential manager. So Grafana login, even though he has access to DBA database, Grafana login cannot run a select against the credential manager database table. So how would Grafana login will retrieve the passwords? It will use the procedures that we created. So here, let's go to the top and use the procedure which helps us to get the credentials. So this is the procedure. Okay, so we'll use this procedure here. So suppose I want to retrieve the password for my own login. So using the procedure, I am retrieving the password in this output variable password, rather this one output variable password, and simply I'm displaying that. So there you can see I was able to successfully decode the password for Grafana login. Can I do this for SQL CMD? Remember, I was so remember Grafana login was delegated. Okay, Grafana login was delegated for SQL CMD. So ideally, it should be able to retrieve the password for SQL CMD. So here we go. Get USP get credentials, server IP all, username SQL CMD, and we want to find out the password for SQL CMD. So let's see if it works or not. So there we are. We are able to retrieve the password for SQL CMD. Can I do the same thing for SQL query stress? Because for SQL query stress credential, Grafana login is not mentioned as delegate. Neither it is creator of that login, nor it is updater of that login. So we have four conditions. Either you should be sysadmin, or you should be creator of that login, or you should have updated that login, or you are mentioned as delegate login 1 or delegate login 2. But in this case, for SQL query stress, Grafana login is not mentioned as either of them. So Grafana login is not creator of SQL query stress, is not updater of SQL query stress, is not delegate login 0, 1 or 2 for SQL query stress. So ideally, Grafana login should not be able to retrieve the password for SQL query stress. So let's see. There we are. We got the error. No matching credential found. Okay. So that's it. That's the idea of this credential manager. I would urge you folks to retrieve to go through other procedures that we have. They are pretty straightforward. This one is USP delete credentials, is meant to delete a credential from credential manager. This one is meant to update few properties of credential in the which is already saved in credential manager. Okay, so let's use this for our demo purpose. So now what we are going to do is we are going to run this query in our in this place. So password query equals okay. So this is all you need to do. You need to connect to your inventory server using your Active Directory authentication. Okay. And get the password for that login. Uh-oh, I need to provide the database to credential database. There we go. So here we are. Now we have we connected to our inventory server, and from inventory server we directly decrypted the password. We got the password for SQL query stress login here. Now, just like in any other automation, you have to process this information, whatever result you got. You have to create a credential, PowerShell credential, and use it wherever you like. So we will talk about how to use this, how to create PowerShell credentials, how to run multi-server queries in serial manner, and how to run multi-server queries in parallel manner in upcoming videos. So if you folks have any kind of query, question, or you find a bug, kindly, if you have any query, then kindly go to this SQL Monitor GitHub repository. At the bottom, you will find some URLs there. One of the URLs is how to get the help from for SQL Monitor from SQL Server community. So all you have to do is you have to join the SQL Server workspace. There is a channel called SQL Monitor there. You can post your query, post your error, okay, there, and maybe me or somebody will definitely help you there. If you have some bug, or if you want some kind of enhancement, kindly raise an issue by coming up here and creating a issue here. If it is an enhancement, you can tag it as enhancement. If it is a bug, you can create it as a bug or issue. So thank you folks, thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe this video, and happy coding.